So, I guess let's just get started. We'll just dive in. Whoever gets here gets here. It should be great. All right. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to this event. I guess let's call it this webinar. My name is Yeshaya Kraus. I'm the Community Education and Engagement Manager for Shalom Task Force. Basically, what that means is that I help with developing a lot of programming specifically for men's education. If anybody knows about Shalom Task Force, one of the main things that people know about is the ad that's in pretty much every Jewish newspaper in the tri-state area, probably, advertising our hotline for victims of domestic abuse to call in and get support. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about us is that we have a very robust education program also, which is really an outgrowth of our main mission of supporting victims of domestic abuse, in which we provide education and information for people to help them to develop, maintain, and support healthy relationships in our community. And this webinar that we're doing tonight is really a direct result of that mission and a direct result of that vision. I believe this is the first time that we've really done something like this on this scale. And we're going to be talking about dating in the Jewish community, specifically for young men, for the people who play the role of supporters of those young men who are dating. So I'd like to welcome you all and thank you all for joining us. This should be a really great evening. With me, we have Rabbi Moshe Sokoloff. Rabbi Sokoloff, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening on a very, very important topic such as dating in the frum world. I myself is the Rav of the Agudas Yisrael of Kivarn Hills, as well as the Maggid Shir and Yeshiva for boys that are in the parsha of dating. I have the privilege of being a Rabbi in Yeshiva Koteres Halacha here in the Queens community, which is tailor-made for boys that are pursuing careers in college while learning part of the day and starting to get into the parsha of dating. So I've been spending a lot of my time dealing with boys that are in the parsha of dating, as well as my past teaching experiences in both the Siftar Teres Yaakov as well as Yeshiva Shar Torah, and having the privilege of being a Shalom workshops presenter for over the last 6 years. I've spent quite some time working with couples and working with individual boys and Bachrim on the parsha of dating, and it's really a privilege to be able to present to Klal Yisrael, I think, a very important message for many of our young men that are starting in a very difficult parsha, very complicated area, uncharted area for many boys. And we have a really special program this evening to help them and their parents and the other members of society that are helping in Shidduchim when it comes to Shadchanim and Rabbanim and Rabbeim and Kala teachers and Chassan Rabbeim. I myself am a Chassan Rebbe, so I know all different areas where dating comes up, and it's really a privilege that Shalom Task Force and Shalom Workshops is giving us this platform to be able to help Klal Yisrael. I want to thank Yeshaya Kraus for bringing me in, for writing up and being involved in the program that you're going to see this evening. It's really something special, and I think for all those that are joining us, we're going to learn a lot, and we're going to learn some very important skills that are often not taught and not even discussed in our community, and it's really a privilege for all of us to gain and to learn this evening.
Thank you so much for that, and I really appreciate you taking the time out for joining us on this webinar tonight. Just talking about things that are not discussed, we do have, if you look at the chat, you'll see that we have posted a link to a post-workshop evaluation. One of the questions there, and these are all, the point of this evaluation is just to try to gauge how effective our programming is and to figure out exactly what we can do to really enhance the programs that we give and meet the needs of the community. So if whoever's here would be able to, at the end of the workshop, to be able to just click on that link and fill out the brief survey. It should not take all that long. That would be a big help to us and a big help to hopefully the people who are able to work with in the future. The other thing that I'd like to mention, the hotline that everybody knows about. One of the things that's also very not much publicized about it is that we also have calls calling in to ask just basic dating questions. Over the course of this evening, we're gonna touch on a lot of different points that come up in dating, and the things that we're going to talk about are really very common questions, very common areas for people to either not think about or to gloss over or to just think that, okay, this is just normal, and these are, or to just not think about it at all. And all of these things can, thinking about any of the topics that we discussed tonight can really lead to a lot of different questions, and they're important questions to ask, and they're important questions to discuss. And we're going to get to this more in depth, and we do encourage everyone who's dating and has questions about their dating process, about the relationships that they're developing in dating. We encourage you very strongly to speak to a mentor who knows you very, very well and you feel you can really be honest with. If for some reason you feel you can't do that, our hotline is available to answer questions in the dating world and throughout the dating process. So you can see that phone number is also available in the chat box. You can take a look there. Before we get started, so one very important question that came up already in the chat that I want to assure people. There's a question and answer box that you can type questions in. We cannot see who's asking those questions. We can't, these are completely anonymous questions. So if you want to ask an anonymous question, please feel free. We're going to be checking on the questions and answers throughout the workshop, and we're going to be trying to work them in, and then we're going to have a dedicated question and answer session towards the end. Hopefully we'll be able to have time to really do justice to some of these very important questions that comes up. So I guess let's get started. I just want to cover for tonight, there are a few goals that we have in mind. There are a few points that we're going to touch on, and really any one of these points could be an entire webinar by itself. If we really went through each one of these goals in depth and at length, we could be here today till tomorrow, maybe even the next day as well. We all need sleep at some point, so we're not going to do that. But we're going to touch on a few basic points, and the point of this is really to just start a conversation and to start people thinking in a certain direction. So we're going to be talking tonight about the decision to start dating. We're going to be talking about knowing what to look for when you're looking for your potential spouse, the research process itself, which is both for the young men who are dating and for the people who are helping them out with research, their supporters. We're going to talk about mentors in the dating world. We're going to be talking about the foundations of a healthy relationship, which is really key to so much of life, not just marriage, but pretty much anything you're going to do in life is based on being able to maintain healthy relationships. We're going to be obviously focusing more on the dating process, but a lot of the things that we're going to talk about maybe can be generalized to other areas of life as well. And then potentially the most important part, or one of the most important parts to come out of this whole thing is taking care of yourself while you're dating. You still have a life. Life is still something that goes on, even though you're maybe in the stage where you're dating and things are a little bit shaken up and out of your regular schedule. But you have to be able to make a balance for that. And again, that's something which is relevant to both the people who are dating and for those who are supporting them. It's very easy to get carried away and let it take over your life. So we're gonna discuss that, and those are the goals for what we'd like to cover tonight. So I guess let's jump right in. So the first thing that when you start talking about dating and the dating process itself, the first thing that really comes to mind is, am I ready? Am I ready to start dating? And how do I make that kind of decision? So it's an interesting thing in our society, because it seems that there is a certain stage in life where it's assumed that people are going to do certain things. You go to elementary school, then you go to high school, then post-high school, you maybe go to base measures for a year or 2 years, maybe longer. You find a career, but there's like kind of a clear-cut path for when people do things on a societal level. And you look around and you see many people who are 20, 21, 22 maybe are starting to date, starting to look into getting married. And there's maybe this pressure on you to feel like, well, everybody else is doing it, shouldn't I be doing this also? And the one thing that I think is the most important to understand in terms of the decision to start dating is that it's your decision. You're the one getting married. Society is not getting married. You're the one who's looking into it and really considering it. And it's important to know how to make that decision in an educated way. The way to really make that decision is you have to take a step back before you can start talking about marriage. And Rabbi Sokoloff, you mentioned the other day when we were talking about this, something that you do with your Talmidim, to really look at yourself and figure out how well you know yourself. self-awareness in this is the key to being able to make a really a life-changing decision. And dating is something that you're starting to walk down the path of really creating the closest and most connected relationship in a person possible in a person's life, really. And it's not a decision that should be made based on well, everybody else is doing it, so I should be doing it also. So the question really is, how do you really develop that kind of self-awareness? Now, people, I don't know, people can type into the chat how old they are just for us to get an idea. Generally speaking, when in our community, when people are looking into dating, they generally range between 20 and 25. That I think is that. Would you say that that's about right? Or Sokoloff, about between 20 and 25? Yeah, so that's about right. So we have someone saying 24. You know, and that I think is generally the range in which people start to really think of it. And I guess the higher on it goes, that's when the pressure maybe can start setting in a little bit more heavily. But in order to really make that decision for yourself in a personalized way, you really have to get to know yourself. I want to share with you. I'm going to share with you a slide here. Let me just see if I can get this done. Okay, here we go. There we go. I'm going to share this quickly. Can everybody, if everybody can see this, you can see this, Rabbi Sokoloff, the wheel?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay. So if you take a look at this wheel, there are a bunch of different aspects to a person's individuality. And if the more you're aware of each one of those different aspects and the more thought you put into them, the more you can really start to know yourself, start to know what makes you tick, start to know what you think is important in life, and knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. And we'll just briefly go around there. You know, physical presentation, which is how you present yourself to other people, how do you look, which maybe sounds like a pretty simple thing, but it's something that it's necessary to be aware of. What's your emotional mind like? What's your emotional state like generally? What are your triggers? What are the things that you find more easy to deal with? What's your sense of spirituality, your connection to Hashem, your connection to a higher power? This is not religiosity, that really fits more into values, but just a sense of connecting and how important is that connection to you. Your background, where you come from, which can be your culture, your family, your immediate family, your different minhagim, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, all these different things. Your values, what do you consider to be important in life in general? Strengths and weaknesses are the different things that your abilities and the things that you find challenging. And your life goals, what do you want, at the end of the day in life, what do you want to accomplish? What do you really want to see? So we've actually developed, we're going to have a link in the chat for people to actually access a worksheet that we strongly suggest people, you can print this out, and you can either do this by yourself, you can do this with your supporters, whether it's parents, mentors, a Rabbi, whoever it is, just to really go through these different aspects of who you are, what makes you up, what makes you tick. And by doing that, you can really get an understanding of what you consider important in life. And you may come to think of certain things that you never really consciously acknowledge they're important to you, but when you start writing them down, you start speaking them out, you'll notice, yeah, this is really important to me, this is something that I want. So you have a picture of who you might be, and then you also have to consider, what does dating mean? What does marriage mean? And how would those things help you towards your stated goals at this point? You know, it's like, I'm sure you can think of different examples for people who maybe marriage would be a great thing, and marriage would be, you know, let's say one of your values is you want to start a family, and you want to be connected with someone on a very close level, something along those lines. Marriage might be something that really fits with that. Whereas on the other hand, if you're somebody who wants to really focus on developing your career and get to a sense of stability before forming close connections, or you want to be able to learn 13 hours a day, or whatever it is you want to be able to focus on, that marriage maybe would not be something that fits in with those goals. So understanding how marriage in general as a concept fits into who you are and what you want out of life is a really important step to figuring out whether dating and marriage is right for you at this point. And then the next thing to think about is the idea of, well, now that we know what you want and who you are and what's important to you, what kind of person would you want to look for that would be able to complement that, that would be able to help support you in looking towards fulfilling your goals? And what kind of person would you want to be able to support in reaching their goals? Because this is really, it's a two-way street. You have to understand that when you're going into this kind of a relationship, it's not something that you're going to, okay, well, I'm going to get married and I'm just going to have somebody who's there to help me out. It's much more than that. You have to be able to be there to help out your wife as well. So knowing what your goals are, knowing what your values are and what your strengths and weaknesses are can help you to kind of pinpoint exactly what you might want to see in the person that you want to marry. And that's and that which leads to the research aspect of things. And Rabbi Sokoloff, you want to talk a little bit about the research process, what's important in there?
I'll just add one thing to what you were mentioning is that very often people think that getting married will be their ticket to happiness. Meaning they're unhappy in the situation that they're in at home, with their parents, with their siblings, be it in school, be it in yeshiva. So in their mind, marriage is going to get me to a happy place. That is not always the right reason to date, because not always is that going to be the ticket to your happiness. There might be other reasons that are causing your unhappiness. But going into a marriage thinking that marriage will make me happier because I won't be at home anymore. I won't have to be with my parents. I won't have to be with my siblings. I won't have to be with my roommates in yeshiva. I will be free. That should not be one of the main reasons why one dates, because that is going to find you in a place that you're going to see more complications come up in marriage, and it's not just a ticket out of the difficulties that you were experiencing. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about reasons to date. As Shai mentioned, correctly so, many guys in yeshiva for sure always feel that pressure. Well, my chavrusa got engaged and my roommate got engaged, so now I have to start dating. Very often when Talmidim come to me to discuss dating, the first question I ask them is, are you ready to date? What do you want? Not what your parents want, not what the yeshiva. We have a society now where because of the Sokoloff crisis, they are pushing young men to date younger and younger. I have a slight issue with that. I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing for every boy. Some boys are not ready and they need the time to get ready. And therefore, having them date at 19 and 20 to solve the Sokoloff crisis, I don't think is fair to anyone. So when you're ready to decide to date, you really have to think good and hard about, am I ready to be responsible for another human being, which is really what marriage is. It's not just all the fun that I'm going to get out of the marriage, which is, there's a lot of great things out of marriage, but you have to be ready to work and to put time and effort to be there for another person, which you have to think about before you take that step in. Because again, we don't date in our circles for fun. We date for a purpose. We date to get married. So if you're just dating to see, well, I'm curious how many girls would be willing to go out with me, or I'm curious how I would be on a date, that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the girl, and it's a waste of everyone's time. Please make sure that you're dating with the mindset is, I want to get married, and I'm ready to get married. That's the mindset that we go into when we date. So that's just another important element I just want to add about when you're ready to make a decision. Do not allow peer pressure. Do not allow society to tell you that you're going to be a statistic if you don't get married right away, and you're going to become an older single bracha. Don't allow any of those comments to make that decision for you. If you're ready, if you have school, that's a serious question. How to balance an education while pursuing dating. If you're seriously learning and you don't want that to disturb your learning, that's a serious question that should be discussed with your own personal Rabbi and mentor, how to balance dating and learning. We'll talk a little bit about that this evening. But don't allow you to be pressured into a situation because you will not be making good decisions. If you're pressured, the pressure will overtake you and you'll not be thinking clearly and you'll not be making the proper decisions that you need to be able to make probably the most important decision of your life is whom to marry, and you don't want to get any other outside information affecting your clear thought for that decision.
Yeah, I just want to summarize what you're saying. I think that this is so important, not just in terms of learning, but in life in general. There are a lot of times when we'll have issues that we feel we need to get away from, and we make decisions based on what we need to get away from, without paying so much attention necessarily to where those decisions are going to bring us, where we're actually going to end up. The most important thing in making any decision, and particularly in terms of marriage, is that you need to keep your eyes on the destination. The destination of dating is marriage. And is that something that you're ready for? Is that something that you want? And you want to plan for that accordingly. So if you're, as you mentioned, if you're dating because of peer pressure, you're basically trying to get away from peer pressure. If you're dating because everybody else is doing it, you're basically trying to get away from the pressure to conform and be like everyone else. Whereas if you're dating because you want to get married, that's your end in mind. That's your goal. So I think that's a very important mindset for anybody who's in the parsha to really acknowledge. So yeah, we're so talking about like research. There's a whole process with this. The different people have their different knowledge and different ways of going about asking questions. One of the things that I think is the most important to really pay attention to when you're doing your research and when you're thinking about it, obviously you want to use that self-portrait idea to inform what kind of person you're looking for. But there are ways to ask questions. There are ways to pick up on little details when you're looking into specific shidduchim and looking into people to go out with. And you want to really try to be aware of it. I'm not sure. I can't really tell how many supporters we have on the webinar right now. But for the people who are actually going to be making the phone calls, there are just a few things to be aware of. Obviously, you want to make sure that subjectively the people that you're looking into are fitting and appropriate for the person that you're doing research for. And the best way to really do that, there are a few tricks, and this is where my social worker training kind of helps. It's kind of like the social worker cheat sheet. Whenever you're asking questions about somebody, it's important to ask them in an open-ended way. I'm sure you can think of, Rabbi Sokoloff, I'm sure you can think of any number of situations which have come up where asking an open-ended question can yield dramatically different results than just asking a question that's a yes or no. Like, is he a good learner? Yes, no. Is he somebody who's responsible? Yes, no. Asking instead, you can try this, you can experiment with this, but asking a question such as, what's this person's sense of responsibility like? What's this person's work ethic like? What can you describe this person's personality for me? What kind of sentences would you use to describe him to somebody who doesn't know him? These are all questions that kind of leave an open slate. There's more than one way to give an answer, and you're kind of allowing the person you're asking to develop their own script. Whereas if you're just asking a closed-ended question, a yes or a no, then you're basically dictating which way they're going to go. And they obviously have a choice in terms of how they're going to answer, but it's much more confined, and you're going to get much less information. So figuring out what those subjective ideas are that you want to talk about are tremendously important, and really having in mind how you're going to word those questions when you're looking into specific people. So I want to take a minute here just to talk about, obviously there's some subjective preferences. Obviously, if you have somebody who needs to have somebody with a sense of humor, someone who is very dry and does not have a sense of humor might not look that good as a match on paper. And might have somebody else who that person would look great with on paper. It's hard to tell in terms of subjective preferences. I do want to talk a minute about the objective needs of a healthy relationship. And we're going to talk more about the specifics of a healthy relationship later. But in terms of how you really figure out what kind of person you're dealing with in terms of the ability to carry on a healthy relationship, there are a few basic prerequisites that you need to be able to have, you need to know are present when you're looking into somebody else, in order to know that this is a good candidate to have a solid, healthy relationship with. One of the things that we need to know is that this person is a generally respectful person. We know that this person is somebody who is able to accommodate other people and able to work with people in a respectful way, and not just kind of take over control of the situation without any regard for the other person's interests. Another point is this person somebody who's generally calm, generally somebody who doesn't get angry easily, or is it somebody who kind of has a hot temper? Once you get to the actual dating stage, which is really just an extension of the research process, if you want to look at it that way, you'll also start to think about whether you feel safe being around the other person. Just emotionally, do you feel safe being around the other person? Self-centeredness, is the person self-centered? Are they willing to really work with you? As we said before, the point of the marriage is to be able to support each other. You have the concept of Ezer Kenegda, which if you run through the logic trails, then the woman is supporting the man, and the man allowing himself to be supported by the woman, it basically comes out that you're each supporting each other in accomplishing your purpose in life. There has to be that ability to be interdependent and to really work with each other to do what you need to do and to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Somebody who has a tendency to be self-centered obviously is going to have a harder time with that. I'm not saying that these are necessarily red flags. They're things to be aware of. Well, control and anger really are kind of more on the red flag scale than not. But all of these things are things to really be aware of, and they can come up in the research phase. If you're using open-ended questions and you really pay attention to the tone that people use when they're answering these questions, it can be a lot easier to pick up on, okay, let's ask the person, well, what happens when somebody does something to get this person upset? Well, they can have a tone that shows that they either really believe what they're saying, that they don't get upset all that easily, or you can tell by their tone that they really do get upset a little bit more easily. And these are things just to be aware of going in. So that's, we have a couple of questions here. Rabbi Sokoloff, I want to get your take on this.
I just want to add before just as a rabbi, I just want to add two things. There's a lot of complicated halachic issues with both being on a resume and calling about a resume. I urge everyone to discuss with their own Rav and places before they start answering. I have the privilege of being on many people's resume as a Rabbi. I, as a privilege, has given 3-part series of shurim about what you're allowed to say for shidduchim. I urge everyone to make sure that they're well-versed in what they can and can't say when asked about shidduchim. It's very complicated. It's not simple. No two cases are the same. No questions are the same. So if you're going to be put down as a reference, please make sure you speak to your own Rav first about what you can and can't say. Secondly, when you're calling about information, please remember that you're calling a human being that has time, that has responsibilities, and don't waste their time. I can tell you how many phone calls I've gotten from parents that call me up and they're wasting my time. They call me up and they say, tell me all that you know about this boy. That is a glorified waste of everyone's time. What exactly do you want me to say? If you want a specific question, I'll be more than happy to answer a specific question. And when I hang up the phone with different parents, I can tell which parent did their homework and which one did not. Some of them actually thought about what they want to ask, and some of them call me up just to shoot the breeze and just, hope I'll slip or say something that's secretive. Please, I ask all of you, if you're going to call up a reference, please think what you want out of this phone call. Think about a specific question you want to ask. Think about something detailed, something that you want to hear. Don't just, and I get this all the time. Tell me all about him. Or I just had the other day, someone called me and said, okay, tell me what's his biggest mistake in life or his biggest flaws. I'm not even sure if halakha can allow to answer that, and I don't even know what you want by that. So in our checking out process, there could be a lot of wasted time, and it's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the references that are on the paper. So please, I ask of you, think about what you want to ask. And Shai mentioned some very great ideas, some details. How do they deal with anger? Are they self-centered? Do they get along with others? How do they deal with stressful situations? These are all great questions. But just to call up someone and say, tell me all you know about this girl, or tell me all you know about this boy is really not fair, and it's really just not doing justice to the process and setting everyone back. So again, just keep in mind, when you're going to ask questions, that everyone should try to understand what they're trying to accomplish with the questions that they're asking.
Yeah, and again, just to really, depending on how imaginative, how creative you want to get with it, you can really script out the questions in a way which you're able to pinpoint exactly what you're looking for and still leave room for the person to really create their own narrative in the answer that they're giving, which is really the ideal. There's an art to it, definitely, but it's not something which is really beyond anyone. And it's okay to consult with people, even if you're trying to figure out how to word these questions, as you said. Like, talk to your Rav about these things. How can I word this question in a way which is going to get me the information that I need and won't be overstepping boundaries that are dictated by Hilchos Lashon Hara or anything like that. It could be a very helpful and important conversation to have. I want to address one of the questions that came up in the Q&A box. We have, how does one detect emotional imbalance or psychological issues? So that is a very loaded question. A lot of times, a lot of times when you're asking these questions, you may get kind of, the people who are doing the research may get a kind of a feeling of something is a little off, or something is not quite what it should be, or something doesn't really necessarily measure up. If you're asking about the specific things that are really important to you, and you're getting that feeling of something doesn't really measure up so well, then that's a sign that there's something that you need to look in more. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a sign of emotional or psychological imbalance or instability, but it's something that you're noticing, and it's something that's bothering you, and you got to pay attention to that feeling. And there are halachas on the other side about when they would need to disclose that as well. At a certain point, when the relationship progresses, there are halachas in terms of how and when she might need to disclose that there's something going on that's not obvious and not straightforward. But really paying attention to the gut feeling of the people doing the research and not glossing it over, that's a big step towards detecting these things, at least in the research process. And similarly, when you're actually dating, if you start getting that kind of a feeling that there's something up, there's something which is not 100% quite right, then pay attention to that feeling. We call it in the workshops that we do in high schools and in post-high school, actually. When we talk about healthy relationships, when we talk about the red flags of an abusive relationship, we call it trusting your gut. We call it that little feeling. We talk about that little feeling that's there, that you know is there, and maybe it's not so comfortable to pay attention to. But in situations like these, for sure, you need to pay attention to that feeling, and you need to figure out what's giving it to you and what it means. What ultimately does it mean? It may be nothing. If once you really hash it out and you go through it, it may really be nothing, or it could be something pretty significant, and it's something to look into if you need to go back and do more research and ask more questions, more pointed questions. Then that might be what's necessary to do. But really paying attention to your gut reaction and that deep inner feeling of either all is right with the world or something is quite wrong with the world. That's the first step in really being able to detect these things. So yeah, I just wanted to put that question in at that point. There's another question here that I think we should also address. Who should call the references on the resume? Because that's really a perfect segue into the next stage that we wanted to talk about, which is the role of the mentor. There are a couple of different roles of the mentor. Rabbi Sokoloff, if you want to talk about you have a lot to say about.
As a Rabbi and someone who's been dealing with Shalom Bayis for quite some time, I would just mention for those boys that are starting to date, it's very, very important that you find the right people to talk to. What I mean by that is many people love to offer advice in areas where they mean well and they have the best intention, but they don't really know what they're talking about. If someone were to call me up tomorrow and ask me advice about which stock to buy and which stock to sell, I would tell them I know nothing about the stock market, call someone else. Yet when it comes to Shalom Bayis, everyone thinks because they were married or they are married, they now know everything about Shalom Bayis. So I urge everyone to just find someone, whether it be a Rebbe, whether it be an older friend, whether it be a mentor, whether it be a therapist, who is confident in their knowledge of how Shalom Bayis works. Many people, especially Bachim in Yeshiva, throughout their life have been going to their Rebbe for guidance, which is great. I endorse it as a Rebbe and as a Rav to get guidance from your Rebbe and your Rav. However, I put this with a asterisk that nonetheless there are some wonderful Rabbanim and Rabbeim in the world that are massive Talmidei Chacham, unbelievable Magid Yeshurim, but Shalom Bayis is not their expertise. And therefore you have to be very careful who you go to speak to get advice on Shalom Bayis. Now, does that mean every Rebbe is not good? Absolutely not. But you need to find a Rebbe or a mentor or a teacher or even an older sibling perhaps who you feel confident knows their way around complicated situations and more than anything can give you the advice that you need to hear, which means they are not self-involved in the situation. Very often shadchanim. I don't speak ill of shadchanim, but they have an essential role in Klal Yisrael. But they also have invested in the situation. They want to see the shidduch come to fruition. So very often they're not the right person to come to for advice, or they're great at shidduchim, but not necessarily experts on Shalom Bayis. So you want to find someone who you feel that knows their way around Shalom Bayis and knows what makes you take what you need to hear and how you can best be advised. So parents are wonderful and terrific, but not necessarily they're the go-to person to go for Shalom Bayis because they're also invested. They also want to see their daughter or son get married. They're very invested. They want to see you happy, and they think that this is going to equal happiness. So what I would suggest is the following. Speak to a friend or a sibling of yours that's been through this before and ask them, who did you speak to? Which Rebbe did you find helpful? Which teacher did you find? Which Rav did you find helpful? And follow them. Because if you're going to start searching around, very often you might not find the right person to give you the right advice. You need, every one of us needs advice in the area of Shalom Bayis and dating. I always give this example. I don't know anyone who gets a license without taking driver's ed. We all take driver's ed. I have heard from people, but I know how to drive. I've been driving since I was 12 years old, and this and that. We all need to take driver's ed to learn what to do. We all need advice on navigating in a relationship, specifically for the boys that have really had very little interaction with girls. The boys that really grew up in a very yeshivish background, where they really have absolutely no interaction with girls besides for their sisters, and that's a very different relationship. You need advice, you need hadracha, and I want to add this. Asking someone for advice does not make you less of a man. Very often people think, well, oh, there's something wrong with me because I need advice, I need help. It makes you not less of a man, it actually makes you a larger and a bigger man. If you are know enough to know what you don't know, you already half the battle is won. Very often people say, I don't need advice, I know what I'm doing. I know how, oh, I'm so suave, I'm so this, I'm so that. You might think you're all that, but very often you're going to learn that you need hadracha in this area. So first of all, realize is not anything wrong with you if you're asking for hadracha and guidance. I think it's a great idea. I urge everyone to find a Rebbe, a mentor, a counselor, somebody who you can turn to. But please, I beg of you, make sure you turn to people that know what they're talking about. Don't get advice from people who don't know what they're talking about. Don't get advice from someone who happens to have a dysfunctional marriage. He's probably the last guy you want to get advice from. The same way you don't want to go to someone who filed bankrupt 3 times and ask him advice on investments. You don't want to go to someone who doesn't really know anything about Shalom Bayis. I'm not doubting anyone's Shalom Bayis because I don't know anyone's Shalom Bayis. But all I'm saying is be very careful who you get advice from and who you listen to. Because you're going to perhaps be bombarded with information from people who mean the best. Again, they are wonderful people. They don't mean to set you up for failure. But because they're not trained, or do they not know, their advice is not going to be helpful. So A, realize the importance of a mentor, realize the importance of having people to bounce things off of, but be very careful and who you pick for that role. Make sure it's someone you feel, or even someone you've heard about. Again, how do we pick doctors? We based on our referral. People went to the doctor and they found it to be very helpful. I think you should do the same thing with a mentor. Ask around. Who have your friends used? Who have your older siblings used? And find someone that you feel comfortable, someone that you know is giving you good advice, and someone that can help you make the most important decision of your life.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that. Part of having that kind of a person in your life is knowing that you feel comfortable really speaking about anything that's going on. Obviously, for a lot of people, this is the first time that you've really had any significant relationship with a girl who's not in your immediate family. And it might be kind of uncomfortable speaking to somebody about it, but if you want to be able to get effective and appropriate advice, you have to really be able to be fully open about whatever's going on, at least in terms of the relationship, how it's affecting you, how it's impacting you, and really what you want. I'll tell you, this is an interesting story. I remember hearing about, there was this guy who was going out, and he had gone out with this girl, I think like 2 or 3 times, and on paper everything was great, and he felt very uncomfortable with it. One of his Rabbi had been the shotgun, tried setting it up, and they're on a phone they're on a phone call trying to figure out exactly why he doesn't want to continue, and eventually his Rabbi said, do you find her attractive? And the boy is hemming and hawing, and the Rabbi said to him, there's really nothing wrong with saying you don't find her attractive. That's kind of important to be able to find the person you're going out with attractive. The point is that if you're not able to talk about something like that with whoever it is that you're seeking advice from, you're not going to get real solid advice. The person can only give you advice based on the picture that you're painting for them. And if you're painting a picture without outlines or without certain colors, they're not going to see the whole depth of your experience. They're not going to be able to help you navigate through that experience if you're not giving them the whole picture. So that's a really major point, to really find someone who you're comfortable with. And there basically there are 3 points for what you want in a mentor. The person has to be objective, like you said before. They can't be pushing their own agenda. The whole point of who these people are and what they're doing when they're helping you to navigate is they should be trying to help you figure out a course of action which will benefit you, which will work out the best for you, whatever that might be. If they have their own agenda, then that already knocks them out of the running as somebody who can really help you out with this. They have to be reflective. They have to be somebody who can help you to be aware of what's going on in your own experience and gives you your own and gives you different perspectives on what you're experiencing, helping you to see things from kind of outside the box that we all find ourselves stuck in. You know, we're limited in terms of our perception. We can't always, the reason that speaking things over with someone else is so helpful is because they're not affected by our own emotional triggers and our own emotional biases, and they don't have that perspective that we have. They're able to see things sometimes in a way which is a little bit more removed. So it's important for them to be able to not only be objective, but to also be able to help you to understand your own experience. And the last thing that's really important to have in a mentor is somebody who's effective. If you're talking to your mentor, you're talking to your Rabbi or your parents or your sibling or whoever you find that you decided to discuss stuff with, and you just end up after a conversation feeling more confused on a regular basis, that's not particularly effective. You want to be able to feel more focused, more directed, more aware of what's going on in your life. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be happy with it. That does not mean you're going to be happy with it all the time. And mentors may be in a position that they have to tell you, listen, you're not going about this the right way, or you did the wrong thing there, or this is not, this doesn't look like this is going to work out, even though there might be such nice things about it. But you have to at least feel a little bit more focused and a little bit more directed at the end of the conversation.
If I can just inject a story that you just mentioned. I had a Talmud who came to me about 3 days before his Afruf, and we sat down together to talk, and I told him, I don't think you should get married to this girl. We were talking about 3 days before the Afruf, and we worked it out, and I explained to him, I didn't tell him what I think he should do. I explained to him, based on what he tells me he wants, that this girl is not any of that. And I looked at him, I said, you tell me, does this make sense? He said, no, it makes absolutely no sense. So I said, why are you marrying her? And it was the proudest moment, I hate to say it, that they broke off this engagement, mamish, right before the Afruf, but it was the best decision he ever made. No one ever laid it out to him in a way where he realized what he really wanted. He finally realized this girl is absolutely not what he wants. But people kept on pushing him and telling him, go for it, it will get better, this will go away, and that will go away. And he never honestly asked himself, what does he want, and is this where he's going to find it? And when he was finally pushed up against the wall to answer that question, the answer was glaring to him. And ultimately, he made the right decision, and they broke off the engagement. Now, again, that's not what we want to hear, but it's a lot better than hearing something going on, realizing this 6 months down the road. So very often, the mentor needs to bring out what you're not realizing on your own. Or he's supposed to get you to ask the uncomfortable questions that you're not asking yourself. And therefore, you have to steer in the mirror and answer very, very difficult questions. If all the mentors tell you, yes, 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 he's not a mentor. He's just mimicking whatever you're saying. He needs to be able to pick up on the nuances, the subtleties, the questions, the red flags, and he's able to give you the guidance and advice in the hard issues. That's part of the role of the mentor, and he's going to have to ask you uncomfortable questions, and you have to be able to handle those uncomfortable questions. And therefore, sometimes if it's a person that you can't be honest, as Yeshaya mentioned, it's going to be a Rabbi, and you're not going to be able to say to him, yes, I'm not physically attracted to her. You're going to have a problem because you're not going to be open and honest. So make sure it's someone that you feel open and honest, that you feel comfortable with, and you're going to be able to handle the very uncomfortable or difficult questions that are asked.
Yeah, and those questions may get very difficult. I heard. So you mentioned before the Shalom workshop. So the Shalom workshop, just to give a little bit of a definition of that, it's a curriculum that we run for newly married, not so newly married couples, giving basic concepts of understanding of relationships, communication techniques, conflict resolution. So the person who helped develop that, Seth Eisenberg, he said a very important line. It's that you have to be able to have a place where you feel safe being uncomfortable. And that can be really what a mentoring relationship can be. It's a place where you're going to talk about uncomfortable things, and you're going to know that even though, yes, these are uncomfortable topics to address, they're important, and this is a safe place to do it. So if you can trust if you can trust the person that you've chosen to discuss these things with to be able to discuss those uncomfortable things and still feel safe, then that's a very good sign. Another one more very important point, and this is something, we discussed red flags on a date, like seeing different things that are going on. You also have to be willing to discuss those red flags if they come up, discussing what they mean. So they may be signs, as we say, seeing somebody who's consistently angry, or seeing someone who has a hard time calming down after disappointment, seeing someone who's possessive or jealous or controlling. These are all things that, as we said, there may be so many nice things about this person on paper, but at the end of the day, you feel a little strange about it. So you have to be able to speak out that gut feeling, to really verbalize that gut feeling, say, okay, there's this thing going on that I really just don't feel comfortable with. Could be with the girl, could be with the girl's family, could be with any number of different aspects of the relationship that you're trying to build. But it's important to be able to verbalize that with the person that you're speaking with. Because that's their function, that's their job, that's what they're supposed to be doing, to help you understand what's going on and to help you make the best and most emotionally healthy decision that you can. And as we said, if you don't have that kind of person in your life for some reason, we do have, if you scroll all the way back up on the chat, we do have people on the hotline who are able to answer such questions and to kind of help you to navigate through those things, to help you to kind of reflect back to you what you're going through, help you to air out and to figure out where you want to go. So I guess let's move on a little bit to the foundations of a healthy relationship. All right, so there are a few basics in terms of building a healthy relationship. One thing you want to pay attention to when you're on a date is, do you enjoy each other's company? Is this something that are you having fun together? The research shows actually that couples that are that may not have the best of communication together, but they enjoy each other's company, they generally have a pretty solid relationship. Whereas if they have great communication skills but they don't spend the time together to have fun, then their relationship is not as effective, and it's not as solid. Communication wise, we're talking about communication. We want communication to be supportive, we want it to be open, we want it to be honest. Honesty and communication, and we were talking about it with a mentor, but not just with a mentor, but also, obviously you want to be able to have honest and open communication with your wife. You want to be able to talk about the hard things with your wife also. You want to be able to have conversations about what's working and what's not. Rabbi Sokoloff, if you have any more experience with this than I do,
as a former yeshiva bacher and spend my entire life around yeshiva bacher, I have to admit, and if any yeshiva bacher disagrees with me, I apologize. But I think overall yeshiva bacher don't exactly express their feelings openly and freely in a regular environment. Whether this be bacher in yeshiva, bacher post yeshiva, or even perhaps college boys, I work with all different types of boys, and I can honestly say boys, young men by nature, have a much more difficult time expressing emotional feelings as women do. That's clear, and I don't think it's even debatable. Yes, every once in a while I come across a very open, emotional boy, and I think it's fantastic. However, what we're doing here in both Shalom workshops and other settings is we're trying to create a situation where boys and men feel much more comfortable expressing their feelings. There's a society out there where real men don't express feelings, real men don't cry, real men are not allowed to have feelings. That's not a manly thing. That is absolutely not correct. It's definitely not a Jewish ideology, and I don't believe it's a correct ideology for anyone. It's normal and very expected to have feelings, and we all should and do have feelings. Now, we have to learn how to express them in a normal and coherent and understandable way. Many times for boys dating, this is a very, very difficult thing for them. Baruch Hashem, the girls are in advance than we are in this area. They're much more comfortable with their emotions. They speak much freely in their emotional feelings with their friends, teachers, parents. For the guys, we're very closed. And in order to be in a healthy relationship, we have to be able to remove that block of unable to emotionally connect to a person, either because we feel like we're not a man if we emotionally connect, or we feel like we're not, masculine or something like that. All these completely ridiculous concepts that are out there in society are not true. A healthy relationship is an emotional relationship. And as Yeshaya mentioned, you want to be able to have fun with the person, of course, but you need to be able to have an emotional conversation, an emotional connection. That comes through allowing your emotions to flow openly. You have to be able to express emotions in a clear, coherent way. For many boys, that is a very big challenge. And before we get into the details of how to do it, I think the first step is realize that that is a challenge. I want to acknowledge that. B, I want you to realize there is absolutely nothing wrong with being emotionally open, and it's actually a fantastic and wonderful thing. It will make you a better person, a better spouse, a better parent, a better child, when you can emotionally be open with those around you. So when you're going into dating, you realize you're going to be opening up a part of your body that has never been exposed yet. Very often, yeshiva guys express themselves emotionally. Again, yeshiva, I don't just mean yeshiva boys, I mean most boys. So realize you're entering into uncharted territory. You're entering into a territory where you're going to be asked to say things and acknowledge things that you never really acknowledged before. To be open emotionally is going to be difficult. It's going to be you're going to be hesitant with it. But please realize its significance and its importance. And as time goes, you will get used to it. You'll get more comfortable with it, but realize it is an essential ingredient in a healthy relationship. And do not think for a second that you can get and be in a healthy relationship if you do not have a healthy way of relaying and giving over your emotions. Please, I urge everyone to realize the significance and importance of a healthy, and this is one of the things we teach in the workshop, as well as many other wonderful ideas, is how to properly open up emotionally if you haven't done so in the past. And we're not going to do that this evening. That takes more time, but please just at least realize this much. The significance, the importance of having an emotional relationship, being in tune to your own emotions, realizing what you're feeling, realizing how you're trying to relay those feelings to someone else, and realize how essential it is to have a healthy relationship.
Yeah, and this actually, one of the questions that came in was how to develop emotional intimacy. And that's really how you do it. You just got to kind of do it. You just open up and you start talking about how you feel, and you really share how you feel. And it's all about taking risks and allowing yourself to feel emotionally vulnerable to an extent, and building on that ability to get to the point where you're both able to connect with each other on an emotional level. That's really how to do it. Another part of communication is your ability to navigate conflicts respectfully and productively, which is also part of the Shalom workshop. I feel like we're almost giving an ad for the Shalom workshop here, which is not a bad thing.
I just think one last point is, besides from learning how to talk, just keep in mind, and this is something we discussed in the workshop at length, when you're on a date, you have to be able to listen to another person. Now, for many people, it's very hard to listen. We love to talk, but if you want to be in a healthy relationship or continue dating, you need to learn how to in a healthy manner to listen to people as well. And realizing that listening means you have to be in tune, you have to be focused, you have to be listening to what the person is saying. You can't just go on a date and just expect that you're going to have 3 hours of a platform to discuss everything you want to get off your chest. That's not what dating is. Dating is not your own private podcast, so you can tell a girl what you think about politics and what you think about hashkafa and what you think about the world. It's a two-way street. Yes, you should be able to express yourself openly, but you also have to be able to listen and allow the other person to speak in an open way, just as you want to be able to be heard.
Yeah, listening is major. It is a two-way street, and you've got to be able to do that properly. And at the same time, you also want to be able to listen to yourself, as we said before, trusting your gut feelings about whether a relationship is comfortable, whether a relationship is safe, whether that's something that you're really able to feel comfortable with and picture yourself with in the long term. And again, these are all things that you need to be able to discuss this with someone, because you're experiencing so many different feelings that you may never have experienced before in your life. You really need to be able to tease them out and to work through them and to be able to understand them properly in a way that actually makes them productive. You had mentioned before the idea of taking care of yourself properly during this phase. This is a major topic here, this idea of taking care of yourself. So the idea of understanding that you have a life beyond the dating process. You want to be able to maintain a fulfilling routine. You want to be able to keep doing what you're doing. Obviously, you're going to have to. This is a big part of your life. It's important. You need to be able to devote a certain amount of time to it. But you want to be able to also keep going with your regular routine. You want to be able to hold on to that. Yeah. Can you give us any advice, any particular advice in terms of how to really manage that kind of a balance?
What I often find with people that are dating, it engulfs their entire being. For many boys that have not too much else going on, and I don't mean this in a negative way, Chas v'Shalom, that Bochum in Yeshiva have nothing else going on. I was a Bochum in Yeshiva for many, many years. I know what it's like. And I know what happens when guys start dating. It becomes their total focus of their life is dating, go from one girl to the next because I have my eye on, I have to get married, and dating engulfs who I am. And it should not be that way. Dating is a part of who you are, but it's not who you are. You have regular schedules, whether it be yeshiva, college, or a job, and none of those things should be lost just because you are dating. Very often I hear from people, well, I'm dating, and therefore I can't do X, Y, and Z. That's not an excuse to explain why you're not living a normal life. You have a regular life to live, and you should live a regular life. And I urge everyone to not allow dating to engulf you, to become your entire being. And very often it happens this way with boys because Baruch Hashem, many of our boys get a lot of girls and have a long list and are just going from one girl to the next. And you never had a chance to think about what went wrong or went right on the previous girl, and am I ready to move on? And you're just not thinking clearly. So when you get into the parsha of Shidduchim, please do not allow this to be your new life. It's a small part of your life. It will affect a part of your life, but it is not who you are, nor is it your entire being. You have other responsibilities, whether it be yeshiva, college, a job. Familiar responsibilities should not get thrown to the wayside because I'm a dating guy. And I've heard things like this from people. Well, I'm dating. Okay, I'm happy that you're dating, and I wish you well about Frocha, but it should not do not allow taking to take over who you are. And another point, if you are dating, and you're dating many girls, and you have not yet found the right one, and you find it overwhelming, it's quite all right to take a break from dating. No one's going to fire you, and no one's not going to read you shidduchim because they heard you took a break. I find a lot of respect, and I often urge Talmidim, take a break. It's too much. You're dealing with a lot. Take a break. You don't have to be dating 24/7. If you have a lot on your plate right now, you have a difficult semester in college, and you can't do it. Take a break. Take a breather. Tell Shachronim respectfully, right now it's just not a good time for me. I'll be ready at a different time. Do not allow dating to take over your life. Make sure you're still in control of your life while you are healthy dating in a normal environment, looking to get married, of course, but do not allow dating to take over your daily routine.
Yeah, and that's so important to understand. Like as we started off, you have this peer pressure to kind of get someplace. So you don't have to let it take over. You don't have to let it dictate what you're doing and how you're doing it. You know, you're in charge of the process. You're in charge of what you do and how you run your life, and this is part of your life. But there are other parts of your life as well. So we're going to get to the question and answer segment. We have a few questions that came in that we have from before the webinar even started. And then we have a few questions that have been asked that we haven't been able to directly address throughout. So let's start with, okay, so that we addressed. Okay. What should one do if he never learned well in yeshiva but wants to learn in kol during marriage despite his wife's objections in order to become a Talmid Chacham? Go for it.
That is a very, very loaded question with a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. I don't know if we have enough time this evening to even break it down. I'm not even sure if this is a question for this platform. I think it's a question that has to do with a lot between this husband and wife or this situation that a lot of it needs to be discussed of what each one expects out of the other. What do I want out of my spouse, what my spouse wants out of me, and where my respect is going to come from. Will I respect him more if he's a Talmid Chacham? Will I respect him less? Will I respect him more if he's learning full-time or part-time? I think that's a little bit beyond our discussion tonight. I think there are other elements that are important to this question to know a little bit more about each one of the two parties. And again, you can become a Talmid Chacham even if you're not learning full-time in Kollel, and you can learn in Kollel full-time and still not become a Talmid Chacham. Neither of those two are dependent one on each other. But again, I think it's a little bit beyond what we have time for this evening.
Yeah, I agree. It's a majorly loaded question. I mean, one point I want to bring out from this question, though, is that this is why it's so important to know who you are, know what your values are, know what your life goals are before going in. You know, obviously we don't know the whole story with this particular question, but you have to be able to work with what you're expecting, what your spouse is expecting. You have to be able to work with it and compromise with it. And the best time to make sure that your values are in line, that your goals are in line, is before you get married, not after. How do you make a positive first impression on your potential, on somebody that you're going out with regarding your learning if you're working or in school? So this really, I think you pretty much addressed. Just because you're working or in school does not mean you can't be amazing in your learning. And just because you're in OHEL doesn't mean that you are amazing in your learning. If you're able to really just be natural around the person, if this is something that's important to you, it's going to come out. Regardless of what kind of schedule you're actually running during the day. You can have somebody who's kaveh itim and has 1 hour a night to learn, and if that's the focal point of his entire day, and she knows that, then she'll respect him for that. And that's going to be something that's very present in the relationship. And it doesn't necessarily make a difference whether the person's learning full-time or not, if that's something that you consider to be important.
Again, just if I can add, I teach, I'm a Rabbi in the yeshiva where boys all go to college half the day and learn half the day, and they're amazing and wonderful bachrim. And I taught in the yeshiva where bachrim are learning full-time. And I've been in the yeshiva where we learn full-time. None of this makes a person who he is. I'm very pro-learning, as you can tell, as a Rebbe and a Rav, but that doesn't define who you are as a person, nor is it always a definition of your Chashivas HaTorah. Chashivas HaTorah and the amount of time you learn is not always synonymous with each other. If you want to give over an impression of what you're about, then talk about what is important to you. Don't reflect or show us, I went to this and that yeshiva. That means very little to me. You talk what is important to you, that's how we know what is important to you. So if a boy wants to relate to a girl that he values Torah, then he should be able to work that into a conversation where he's giving off that impression to her that Torah is essential and very important to him. But just to say, I went to that yeshiva, so automatically you should connect the dots, to me doesn't add up at all. So don't be worried or concerned, and I hear this from parents all the time. My son went to this yeshiva, how's he going to do in the shidduchim world? I said, he'll do wonderful, as long as he's a wonderful boy. It's all about you as a person, what you made of your life, how you lived your life, and what you do with your life. You're not bound by what yeshiva you went to, what environment you're from, or where your background is. It's what you do with your life. And if you give over an impression to anyone about what's important to you, they will see who you really are and what you're really about.
Yeah. This next question is something that came up a couple of times. Who should call the references on a resume? I think there really are no rules. A lot of times it's the parents, sometimes it's a Rebbe. Sometimes parents actually particularly prefer that they are not the ones to call because they feel it's too overwhelming for them. It's a job, and it could really be anyone. I mean, like I've heard of situations where the person who's going out has made those phone calls. And I think it's not as common, but assuming that it's done in a way which is respectful and which is honest, I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world.
I've received phone calls from different people telling me from the get-go, I'm calling about my niece, I'm calling about my this, I'm calling about my that. They let you know from the beginning. I think it's respectful to let them know who you are before. I think it's just common sense. I think Yashua is to say, by the way, I'm calling on behalf of someone, not to put anyone. I don't suggest, I've gotten phone calls from single girls calling for their friends for Rabbeim. I don't like that. I don't think it's healthy for a lot of reasons. But I think if you have, let's say, for example, a situation where the parents are not comfortable, or very often the parents are not from, or complication, and you have an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent who can do that, I think that's fine. There's no real rules here. But I don't like when single people do it. It becomes very, very not professional. It becomes a little of a joke. And I've gotten phone calls from single girls calling about their friends. I don't like any of it. I think that should not be done. But I think if you have a mature family member, it doesn't have to come from the parents. It can come from anyone else. It can come from a Rebbe, as long as it's someone that's looking out for the benefit of the person that is going out.
Right. Okay, so here's the next one. What would you say to a person who is emotionally ready, but not financially ready? See, I think that actually, it's a very subjective decision. Some people are willing to kind of wing it. You have a lot of people who are in OHEL who are not necessarily financially solvent, but they're willing to make it work. So I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a deal breaker, but it's something that has to be looked at, and it's something that you have to have at least some kind of a plan in terms of how you're gonna make things work.
I think the essence over here is, as you just ended off, is having some form of a plan. You can't go into a relationship expecting money to fly off the sky, from the sky, or expect the government to take care of you completely. You have to have some form of plan. Now, that plan can look in many different ways. That plan can be that you're going to hustle and you're going to find jobs and you're going to, you're going to tutor on the side and you're going to pick up substituting Rabbi jobs on the side. That's all fine. But you have to have a plan. It's not fair to get involved in a relationship where you don't, al pi derech hateva, have a way to support a wife. Now, that doesn't mean you might not be able to date a girl and the girl will have a wonderful job, or she'll have very loving parents that want to support you. You can't count on that. That's great if it happens, but you have to be able to know on your own 2 feet, that you have some form of a plan. Again, and if your parents are telling you they want to help you, that's their business. Again, that's a bigger discussion. I think we discussed this in our Shalom workshops about parental support and things like that. It gets sticky and gets complicated, but I think you have to have a plan, whatever that plan is, whether or not, again, and run it by someone first to see if it's a practical plan. If you say to yourself, well, I'm really talented, and I think the day I come out of Shem Brachos, they're going to hire me to say the highest share in some yeshiva. That's not a practical plan. You have to have a plan that's practical, that you can actually one day make money with. Then I think if that plan is ran by someone who has an idea of how the world works, and tells you that that's a viable plan, and you're willing to work hard, and you're willing to make it work, then I don't think that's necessarily a reason not to start dating just because of that. There are other factors. Again, education is a big factor. These are things that you should discuss with your own Rebbe or mentor before, to realize how difficult it is and how manageable it is, to see, are you using this as an excuse? Can you make it work? Can you toughen it out? All things like that. But again, if you have a plan which makes sense on paper, even if right now you're not making a lot of money, but you have some form of a means to make parnasa, I don't know if necessarily saying I don't have money is a reason not to start dating.
Right. Very well said. Thank you. Tips for self-care. This is a big one here. We kind of touched on this a little bit, but we can go more into detail. I think one tip for self-care is that people like to feel that things are normal. When you kind of relinquish that feeling of normalcy, that's when things tend to get out of whack. So the first and most significant tip for self-care is maintain as much of your normal schedule as you possibly can. You know, whether that's going to work and going to your job and doing your job well, or going to your sidarim and learning with your chavrusa, even if you have to take off a seder to go out on a date, or whatever it is, running your normal schedule is the single most important tip for self-care. You mentioned also the idea of taking a break if you feel overwhelmed, making sure that you speak with friends, make sure that you socialize with friends, do things that you enjoy. If you have a hobby, then do that hobby. If you play the guitar, make sure you're playing the guitar. Do things that you find fun. Make sure that you're enjoying yourself also on the side, and you're not just completely focused on the dating process. As much normal as you can hold on to, as much of your regular schedule as you can hold on to, that's really the best way to do self-care.
If I can just add one thing, be very careful when you start dating. Do not share private stories or names of girls that you dated with friends of yours. I was in yeshiva for many, many years, and this is a problem, because you can say accidentally something that went really wrong with the girl, and then a week later your friend is read to this girl, and quickly her name gets rejected. So please, for all our boys, be careful what you say about dates. Dating is a private experience. It should not be lunch talk or supper talk at yeshiva. It shouldn't be discussed with your chavrusas. None of these things should be public information, because again, people's lives can be affected by this, because you don't realize that you're saying a story and you think it's playful, it's a joke, it's cute, but this girl might be read down the line to another boy in yeshiva, and he's going to completely reject her for no good reason. So please, keep these things private. It is private. It's not fair to our girls. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to society. Please, keep your stories without names. Don't let anyone know who you're dating. It's no one's business. It should be done with a certain amount of tznius. No one has to know where you're going, who you're going, and what you're dating, things like that. Please keep that all private for her benefit and really for everyone's benefit.
Yeah. So this next question, someone complaining that he feels he can't emotionally connect with women, that he feels there's something wrong with him. I would say that, so first of all, that's not, depending on who the person is, obviously there's a lot of background on this that, would need to be fleshed out to give a full answer. Emotional connection, as we said before, it's not something that a lot of people are really used to. And when you throw in the added level of, well, not only am I emotionally connecting, which is unfamiliar territory for me, I'm emotionally connecting with a woman, which is another step removed. It may be that he's just not used to it. And it may be that there are some other things going on. My suggestion would be that he should really be able to speak this out one-on-one with a mentor, because this is something that really needs more of an individualized discussion than we can really address on this platform. How often should a person be going out? That's also I think it's a very subjective thing. People have busy schedules. People have different schedules, and not always does it work out that you're able to go out once or twice a week for 3-4 hours a day. It really depends, and as long as there's able to be open conversation, whether it's through a shadchan or further on once you get past the shadchan, and you're both willing to accommodate the busy schedule and the less frequent dating, then that's fine. As long as you're both okay with it, and as long as you're both on board for that and understanding it, it can definitely.
I would make one suggestion that I've seen happen very often. When you're dating and you're trying to cram in the dates, very often you'll be going on dates when both of you are extremely tired and you're not thinking clearly. And we all know that when we're tired, we're very snappy and we're not really thinking clearly. And I've seen with Talmidim of mine that I had a story not so long ago where I told the Talmid of mine, please don't go on the date with this girl. I know you're tired. I know you've been running crazy hours. Please don't go on the date. I guarantee it's not going to work out well. And of course, he didn't listen to me. And of course, it was a complete disaster. And I said to him, I'm not a Navi. I just know that when we're tired people, we're not the best of our game. So if you're going to do speed dating, or you're going to do crazy hours of dating, you're going to be really shooting yourself in the foot, because you're not going to be at your best game. If you're going to be going out back to back and running yourself ragged, and I understand sometimes you have to. If you're dating a girl from out of town, so you got to cram everything in the weekend. So you're going to be going out Thursday night, Friday. That's all fine. I get it. I understand. But if you're going to be going out when you're not ready emotionally because you're so tired, or you just need a break, or your head is spinning, don't push yourself to go out on the date. It's not going to work, because you're not going to be at the best of your game, and you're not going to have a productive date.
Yeah, and I think that's also a very important point. Knowing yourself, knowing what you can handle physically, that's a big deal. It's not all about emotions. You have a body that you live in, and you have to be able to live it. You have to be. You can't be sleeping on a date. It's not a good idea. One more question that we have here. Somebody says, I've been going through a tough time in the past few years emotionally, and though I've gotten better, it's not perfect. Does it make sense that once I'm married, things will get better? That's what I've been told. No, it does not make sense that things will get better. One thing that I would caution anybody who's listening on the line tonight, if you come away with one thing tonight, it's let it be this. Marriage does not fix anything. Marriage is hard work, and it can be very rewarding, it can be amazing, it can be great. But if there are specific issues that you're challenged with, that you've been struggling with, whether they're emotional issues or whatever issues they might be, social issues, then understand that those are going to be there. Those are very likely going to be there for the long haul. And when you go into marriage, you're not going into marriage and recreating yourself as somebody who doesn't have those issues. You are going into marriage with those challenges that you have. So if you're don't go into marriage hoping that marriage is going to fix everything for you, because it won't. You're going to be disappointed. She's going to be disappointed, because these issues, no matter how much you may try to hide them, they'll come bubbling through in some way or another. So just be very careful that you're not getting married or starting to date with the hopes that this new stage of life is going to change everything for you. And we have one more. Let's go for one more question, I think. Here's an interesting one. How long should the date be? Any thoughts on that one?
How long should a date be?
Yes. How long should the date be?
So again, it's hard for me to answer these questions, because many people are in yeshivas or have Rabbeim that are telling them the answers to these questions based on what they consider hashkafa. But I think I've been hearing different things from different shadchanim, that something around the 2.5 hour or something like that. Again, I don't know. I think it depends on a lot of factors. I think it depends. I don't think it's fair to take a girl out for the first time for 4 hours, especially if the date starts at 8 o'clock at night, which means you're taking her home at 12 o'clock at night. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should try to be respectful of her and for her time. Her time is valuable. Your time is valuable. So I think, 2 hours or something along those lines, I think is probably acceptable. But again, I don't know if there's rules. Again, this is really more the Shadchanim kind of made up these rules and set the rules. Again, I'm only saying that because I don't want someone to get advice here and then go against what everyone else is doing, then they're going to look strange. So find out from your friends or from Shadchan what the norm is. It's not a psychological or a Shalom bias question. It's much more of what the norm is. Like, we're not going to here to give you, places where to go on dates either. That's really what your friends and older siblings are for. Ask around what everyone else considers normal, and I would follow like that. I think somewhere between 2 and 2.5 hours for a first date sounds right to me. But I would ask what the norm is today, because again, I haven't dated in a few years. I don't know what norm is anymore. But that's something that you should be able to ask those that are in the parsha at the moment.
Okay. So I think we're gonna wrap things up for now. I would like to thank everybody for joining us. I hope that everybody found this informative and helpful, especially to those who are asking the questions. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to come away with some information that can really help you to think more about the dating process and understanding it, and really be more truthful to yourselves, and come out with decisions in a really great way. So again, I just wanted to mention in the chat, we do have the link to the survey form. It would be very helpful for everybody to be able to go there and fill it out. I'd also like to thank our behind the scenes man, Jeffrey, who's been running all the tech stuff from behind the scenes. So a big shout out to him. Thank you very much for all your help with this. And thank you, Rabbi Sokoloff, so much for joining us. It's been, I really appreciate your joining us and helping us to address this particular issue in the community. Again, if people have questions about dating, about their relationships, our hotline is available. I also encourage you to check out our website. We do have other productions that have gone on related to healthy relationships that people have found beneficial. If anybody has ideas for other areas that they feel would be useful to hear about, that's also something that's in the form. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Shai.
Thank you, Rabbi Sokoloff. Thanks so much.
All the best. Good luck, everyone. Take care.
Good luck. Hatzlacha, everyone. Have a great night.